How did Remedy Entertainment, the team behind Alan Wake 2, design the soundscape for a game split into two worlds while undergoing a shift into the horror genre? Last week, I attended GDC, where Alan Wake 2 was nominated for Audio of the Year at the Game Audio Network Guild Awards. There, the Alan Wake 2 audio team gave multiple talks about the game's audio design, which inspired me to make this video. So, welcome to Player by Ear. I'm an up-and-coming sound designer and all-around game audio enthusiast. So let's dive right into the audio of Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 is a survival horror game released in 2023. At its core, Alan Wake 2 is a tale of two worlds, the Dark Place and Washington State, and this split is further driven home by the opposing soundscapes. Washington State is grounded in reality and sounds more natural. In contrast, the Dark Place is meant to sound like an imaginary, twisted version of the real world. The example they showcased at GDC is the gunshot sound. So in the Dark Place, gunshots sound semi-realistic but also have these surreal reverb tails. Everything sounds semi-realistic but just slightly off, like an unsettling fever dream. The audio team tried to make these two worlds sound distinct, so when the line between these two worlds blurs, design elements from each world quote-unquote invade each other, which creates this feeling that something's not right, like this thing is not supposed to be here. Released 13 years after the first Alan Wake 2 also leaned more towards the horror genre than the original, so its audio team built the entire soundscape from the ground up without reusing assets from the first game. Besides a larger focus on ambience, many of the sounds are also more weighty. In an interview with The Sound Effect, principal audio designer Tatsuo Skisari said, "With the new focus on psychological horror, we knew early on that we wanted to give more weight and detail to the characters. This meant spending a lot of time working on updating the combat system to a closer and bolder level, making it feel more visceral and desperate. I think this is the most noticeable with the sound of the flashlight boost. Take a listen." Since the first game was more action-oriented, combat sounds were intended to be heard more often. Typically, we as sound designers try to avoid making frequent sound effects sound too bassy or impactful because that gets very annoying and heavy on the ears over time. However, Alan Wake 2 is much more slower paced, so these sounds play less often. In addition, horror games and films tend to have a high dynamic range, aka a larger volume difference between the quietest and the loudest sounds. This makes larger moments like big emotional moments or jump scares pop out more, so it makes sense that combat sounds more impactful in Alan Wake 2. A lot of what was done in Alan Wake 2 boils down to juxtaposition. The realness of the Pacific Northwest versus the surreal illusion of the Dark Place. Tense silence versus loud, impactful moments. And overall, these contrasts help reinforce Alan Wake 2's unsettling tone and shift into horror. That's all for this video. This was Player by Ear. Join me next week when I'll be taking a look at another game nominated for the Game Audio Network Guild Awards.